Ik this one wonderschön Apache-Kriegerin, and there are mich NIE wieder jab, face screaming in fear. The air was dry, carrying the faint scent of sage and the distant hint of wildflowers clinging stubbornly to the arid soil. The traveler moved slowly along the rocky path, his boots crunching over stones and sand, every step echoing in the stillness. He had come to this remote part of the Southwest seeking something he could not quite name, a break from the noise of the cities, the endless rush of his usual life, a chance to find something real. He did not expect what he would find. As he rounded a bend in the trail, his eyes caught a movement near a small cluster of trees that seemed out of place in the desert's emptiness. He paused, squinting against the sun, and saw her for the first time. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her hair, dark and glossy, fell loosely around her shoulders, catching the sunlight like strands of polished onyx. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and full of a quiet strength that seemed to command the very wind. She carried herself with a confidence born from years of experience, a kind of presence that made the traveler feel both insignificant and strangely drawn toward her at the same time. She was practicing with a bow, her movements precise and graceful, each arrow flying straight and true to its target. He watched in awe as she pulled another arrow, drew the bowstring back with effortless power, and let it fly, striking the center of a distant mark. The sound of the arrow hitting its mark was sharp in the quiet, and she barely glanced at it before nocking another. There was a rhythm to her actions, a harmony between her body, the bow, and the desert around her that the traveler could not fully understand. He knew instinctively that he was witnessing more than just a skill demonstration. He was seeing a way of life, a part of a culture that had survived centuries of struggle and change, carried forward by people who respected the land and their traditions. He felt a mixture of awe and humility. Here was someone who lived fully in the moment, who trusted herself, and whose connection to her environment was undeniable. He had read about such warriors in books, seen portrayals in films, but nothing compared to this. Nothing felt as real as watching her now. Curiosity overcame caution, and he stepped slightly closer, hoping she would not notice him yet wanting her to. He wanted to understand who she was, what her life was like, what it meant to be someone so deeply connected to the land. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the desert in new ways, and she finally turned, sensing his presence. Their eyes met, and the moment stretched longer than it should have. There was no fear in her gaze, only a quiet assessment, a measuring of the unknown. The traveler felt a thrill run through him, a mixture of fear, admiration, and an undeniable attraction. "Hello," he said softly, unsure if she would respond. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she observed him, her eyes steady, her stance relaxed but alert. Then slowly, a small, polite nod appeared on her face. It was a greeting, but also a challenge, as if to say, "You are in my world now, tread carefully." The traveler cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how much he stood out in her presence. His clothing, his gadgets, even his mannerisms, all of it marked him as someone from another world, someone who had not yet learned the lessons that this land demanded. Yet, there was an openness in her stance that invited conversation. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said, taking another cautious step closer. "I'm just traveling through." Her gaze softened slightly, and she gestured to a nearby shaded area where the ground was flatter and smoother. It was an invitation, silent but unmistakable. Hesitating only a moment, he moved toward it, careful not to break the unspoken rules of her space. As he sat down, he could see more clearly the tools she carried, the bow, a small quiver of arrows, a knife strapped to her waist, and he realized this was not a casual hobby for her. This was her life, her identity. "I am Kaya," she said, finally breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, measured, and carried a weight of authority. "And you are?" "Ethan," he replied, almost whispering. The simplicity of the exchange belied the complexity of the moment. Names were important. They carried history, meaning, and connection. Kaya nodded once, acknowledging him without unnecessary words. The desert seemed to shrink around them, leaving only the two of them in this space suspended between sun and shadow. Ethan felt an unusual calm in her presence, as if the world had slowed down, giving him a chance to catch up to something he had long sought but never found. Over the next hour, he watched as she continued her practice, and occasionally she would glance at him with a quiet curiosity. He noticed how her movements were precise yet fluid, how her eyes scanned the surroundings constantly, aware of every detail. It was clear that her life required vigilance, adaptability, and strength. Ethan realized that this was a person who could survive anything, someone who had mastered the art of living in harmony with a harsh and unforgiving world. "I've never seen someone handle a bow like that," he said finally, breaking the silence. "You make it look easy." Kaya smiled faintly, the kind of smile that did not come often and carried the weight of experience behind it. "It is not easy," she said. "But it becomes part of you. You cannot force it. You can only practice and respect it." The traveler nodded, absorbing her words. There was wisdom in them that extended beyond the bow and the desert. It was about patience, respect, and understanding one's place in the world. For the first time in a long while, he felt as if he was learning something real, something that no book or lesson could teach him. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the desert floor, Kaya finally put down her bow. She walked toward a small fire pit nearby, where she began to prepare a simple meal. Ethan watched, fascinated by the way she moved, efficiently, purposefully, yet with grace. He realized that every part of her life had meaning, every action a reason, and every choice a consequence. It was a stark contrast to the hurried, disconnected life he had left behind in the city. They shared the meal in companionable silence at first, the kind of silence that feels natural and not awkward. Slowly, conversation began, cautious at first, then gradually opening. Kaya spoke of her family, her people, and the traditions that had shaped her life. She shared stories of survival, of challenges met with courage, and of lessons learned in the unforgiving desert. Ethan listened, captivated not just by her words but by the strength and clarity in her voice. As night fell, the stars emerged in brilliant clarity, their light reflected in the stillness of the desert. The fire flickered, casting warm shadows over their faces. Ethan felt an unexplainable connection, a sense that this encounter was no accident. He realized that meeting Kaya was not just a chance event. It was a turning point, a moment that would shape the rest of his journey in ways he could not yet imagine. He looked at her and understood something fundamental. Kaya was not only a warrior of skill but a guardian of a way of life, a living embodiment of resilience, tradition, and wisdom. And in that realization, he felt the first stirrings of a choice he might soon have to make, a choice that would test his courage and commitment, and perhaps change his life forever. As the desert night settled around them, Ethan could not shake the feeling that he had stepped into a story far bigger than himself. He did not yet know where it would lead, but one thing was certain. He had encountered something extraordinary, and he would never forget this meeting. The desert, the stars, and the woman who had captured his attention would remain with him, echoing in his mind long after the fire had died down and the night had passed. After their first meeting, Ethan found himself returning to the desert each day, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and fascination. Kaya's world was unlike anything he had ever known. The small, isolated community where she lived seemed almost untouched by time, a place where traditions were alive and every person had a role to play. The traveler quickly realized that this was not a place for idleness or frivolity. Survival and respect were at the core of daily life. Every action mattered, and every choice carried consequences. Ethan observed Kaya as she went about her day. In the early mornings, she would rise before the sun, her movements quiet and deliberate. She tended to small fires, prepared food, and checked the surroundings for signs of wildlife or intruders. Ethan noticed how alert she was, scanning the horizon constantly, aware of every detail that might escape a less practiced eye. Her attention was not frantic but steady, methodical, and always purposeful. Watching her, he understood that this attentiveness was not just for survival, it was a reflection of her connection to the land itself. One morning, Kaya invited him to join her on a walk through the desert. Ethan felt both nervous and excited. He had never ventured so far into unfamiliar terrain, and yet, being with her made the experience feel safe and natural. They walked along narrow paths, past rocky outcrops and low, hardy shrubs, as she explained the plants, the tracks of animals, and the subtle signs that indicated the presence of water. Each lesson was small but meaningful, and Ethan was amazed at how much knowledge Kaya held, knowledge passed down through generations and honed by experience. "This plant," Kaya said, pointing to a low, green bush with tiny leaves, "can be used to treat minor wounds. The sap has healing properties, but you must use it carefully. Too much can be harmful." She plucked a leaf, crushed it gently, and demonstrated the proper way to apply it. Ethan listened closely, taking mental notes. He realized that every aspect of her life was intertwined with nature, and that understanding and respecting the environment was essential for survival. As they walked further, Kaya pointed out tracks in the sand. "See these?" she asked. "Coyote tracks. They move mostly at night, so you don't usually see them during the day. If you follow the tracks carefully, you can learn a lot about their behavior." Ethan crouched down, examining the prints, amazed at how much could be learned from such subtle signs. He felt like a student in a classroom far more complex than any he had known before. By midday, they had reached a small clearing where Kaya often practiced her skills. She handed Ethan a simple wooden training bow. "Try it," she said, her eyes assessing him, not impatient but watchful. Ethan fumbled at first, struggling to knock the arrow properly and pull the string back. Kaya moved beside him, correcting his stance, guiding his hands with patience. The process was difficult, but Ethan was determined. With each attempt, he felt a small sense of progress, and Kaya's encouraging nods made him feel that he was capable of more than he had imagined. "You're improving," she said finally, a small smile appearing on her face. "It takes time, but you are learning to focus. That is more important than strength." Ethan nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and relief. He understood that her lessons were not only about physical skill, but about discipline, patience, and observation, qualities that extended far beyond the desert. After their practice, they rested under the shade of a large rock formation. Kaya spoke of her past, carefully choosing her words. She shared stories of her childhood, of growing up learning the ways of her people, of the respect and responsibilities that came with being part of the community. She spoke of her parents, teachers, and mentors who had guided her, shaping her into the warrior she had become. Ethan listened intently, sensing the depth of her experience and the pride she held in her heritage. Ethan realized that Kaya's strength was not just physical. It was mental, emotional, and spiritual. She had learned to balance courage with caution, independence with community, and strength with wisdom. Her life was demanding, yet she carried it with a grace that made it seem effortless. The more he learned, the more he admired her, and the more he felt a desire to understand her world fully. Over the following days, Ethan was allowed to join in small tasks. He helped gather firewood, carry water, and assist with simple chores. Each task seemed mundane at first, but he quickly understood their importance. Every action contributed to the well-being of the community, and neglecting any duty could have consequences. Through these tasks, he gained a newfound respect for the discipline and dedication required to live in such a place. One afternoon, Kaya took Ethan on a hunt. It was a test of patience and observation. They moved quietly, communicating with gestures rather than words, watching the movements of birds and small animals. Ethan felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The experience was humbling. He realized how much skill and awareness were required to survive and thrive in this environment. When Kaya successfully demonstrated a method of tracking and catching small game, Ethan felt a deep sense of respect for her abilities and the life she led. Evenings were a time of storytelling and reflection. Around the fire, Kaya shared legends and teachings of her people. She spoke of courage, honor, and the importance of protecting one's community and the land. Ethan listened, captivated not just by the stories but by the way she told them, full of passion, reverence, and understanding. He began to see the values and principles that guided her life, realizing that these were not just stories, but lessons in living with integrity and purpose. As the days passed, Ethan felt a transformation within himself. The desert, the routines, and Kaya's guidance were teaching him lessons he had never learned before. He became more observant, patient, and mindful. Simple acts like preparing a meal, tending to a fire, or walking quietly through the desert carried new meaning. He began to understand the interconnectedness of all things, how every choice affected the environment, the community, and himself. Kaya noticed the change in him. "You are learning," she said one evening as they watched the sunset together. "Not just about survival, but about respect, patience, and understanding. You are beginning to see the world differently." Ethan felt a sense of pride and gratitude. He knew that this journey was changing him in ways he could not yet fully comprehend. By the end of the second week, Ethan had gained a small measure of skill and confidence. He could nock an arrow, recognize tracks, and move quietly through the desert. But more importantly, he had gained insight into a way of life that valued respect, courage, and harmony. He felt a connection to the land and to Kaya that was deeper than anything he had experienced before. The bond between them was growing. While words were limited, their actions and shared experiences spoke volumes. Ethan realized that he was no longer just a visitor. He was becoming part of a world that demanded commitment, attention, and respect. And with that realization came a sense of purpose he had never felt in his previous life. As they prepared for another night under the stars, Ethan reflected on the journey so far. He had entered the desert seeking something undefined, but he had found lessons, growth, and a connection that resonated deeply within him. Kaya's presence, her guidance, and her strength had opened his eyes to possibilities he had never imagined. He knew that the days ahead would bring challenges and choices, but he also knew that he was ready to face them. Inspired by the warrior who had become his guide, mentor, and companion in this extraordinary journey, days turned into weeks, and the bond between Ethan and Kaya grew stronger with each shared experience. It was no longer just about learning survival skills or observing a way of life different from his own. Ethan felt something deeper, a quiet, persistent pull toward her, a fascination that went beyond admiration. Every glance, every gesture, and every shared moment carried an unspoken understanding that drew him closer to her world, and to her. They spent the mornings together in the desert, tracking wildlife, gathering resources, or practicing skills. Ethan had improved significantly since his first arrival, but he knew he still had much to learn. Kaya's patience remained steady, her guidance gentle but firm. She corrected his posture with subtle adjustments, pointed out details he had overlooked, and challenged him to be more aware of the environment around them. But these lessons were no longer just about survival. They were about connection, observation, and respect. And Ethan found himself absorbing them not only with his mind but with his heart. One afternoon, they followed the tracks of a small herd of deer. Kaya moved silently, almost blending into the landscape, while Ethan struggled to keep pace. She stopped and crouched low, motioning for him to do the same. "Patience," she whispered. "Do not rush. Nature does not hurry, and neither should we. Ethan felt a strange sense of calm descend over him as he obeyed. The rhythm of her breathing, the steady focus in her eyes, and the awareness she carried made him feel part of something larger, something timeless. As they waited, Ethan's gaze lingered on Kaya. Her face was lit softly by the golden afternoon sun, her expression serene yet intense. He noticed the strength in her arms, the careful precision in her movements, and the quiet determination in her eyes. There was an elegance to her that was not simply beauty but power, grace, and confidence all combined. In that moment, he understood why he felt so drawn to her. She was not just a person. She was a presence that commanded respect and admiration without demanding it. When the deer finally appeared, Kaya guided him through the process of observing without disturbing, of understanding their behavior, and of respecting their space. It was a subtle lesson in empathy, one that extended far beyond the desert. Ethan realized that every action had consequences and that living in harmony with nature required patience, mindfulness, and humility. The deer eventually moved on, and Kaya looked at him with a small, approving smile. "You are learning," she said. Ethan felt a rush of pride, not for the accomplishment itself, but for the acknowledgement of growth and effort. Evenings were the time when their connection deepened in ways that words could not fully capture. Around the small fire, they shared simple meals, spoke quietly, and watched the stars emerge one by one in the vast desert sky. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with a sense of understanding that did not require explanation. Ethan began to notice the subtle ways Kaya expressed care, adjusting the fire so it would not smoke too much, sharing water first, offering encouragement when he struggled. It was in these small acts that the depth of their bond became most evident. One night, as the moon rose high above the desert, casting a silver glow across the landscape, Ethan found the courage to speak about his feelings. "Kaya," he began, his voice uncertain but earnest, "I don't fully understand everything I feel, but I feel connected to this place. And to you, I've never experienced anything like this before." Kaya listened silently, her eyes reflecting the firelight. She did not speak immediately, but the way she looked at him conveyed understanding, acceptance, and a quiet acknowledgement of the truth in his words. Her response was gentle but meaningful. "Ethan," she said softly, "this connection, it is real, but it comes with responsibility. You must understand our world, our values, and our ways before you can truly be a part of it. Connection without respect is fragile." Ethan nodded, appreciating the wisdom in her words. He realized that this was not a simple romance but a relationship built on trust, understanding, and shared experience. It was something profound, something that required dedication and heart. Over the following days, their bond grew through shared experiences and quiet moments. Kaya began teaching Ethan more about her culture, the stories of her ancestors, and the principles that guided her life. She explained how her people valued courage, community, and harmony with the land. Ethan listened, captivated not only by the stories but by the way she spoke, her reverence for her heritage, her strength of character, and her unwavering commitment to her principles. He also began to share his own experiences, cautiously at first but more openly over time. He spoke of the city he had left behind, the noise, the hurry, and the emptiness he had felt there. Kaya listened without judgment, offering insight when appropriate, and showing empathy in her quiet, steady way. Through these conversations, Ethan felt their trust deepen, a bond forming that went beyond words and actions into something more intangible, a connection of hearts and minds. One afternoon, they ventured to a nearby canyon. The air was cooler, and the shadows stretched long across the rocky walls. Kaya led the way, showing him how to navigate the terrain safely, how to notice subtle changes in the environment, and how to move with awareness. Ethan felt exhilarated and nervous at the same time. The canyon was beautiful but also demanded attention and care. As they paused at a high ledge overlooking a wide valley, he realized that he felt alive in a way he had never known. The danger, the beauty, and Kaya's presence combined to create a sense of wonder and clarity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple, Ethan found himself sitting beside Kaya, feeling the warmth of the fading day and the quiet of the desert around them. Words felt unnecessary, yet he spoke softly. "I never imagined I could feel like this, so alive, so aware, so connected." Kaya turned to him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "This is the desert," she said quietly. "It teaches those who listen, and you are learning to listen." In the days that followed, their connection became more evident in small gestures and shared routines. Ethan began to anticipate Kaya's needs, helping without being asked, observing details she might overlook, and learning the rhythms of her life. Kaya, in turn, began to trust him more, allowing him to participate in more complex tasks, showing him parts of her world that few outsiders ever experienced. Their interactions were filled with respect, understanding, and a deepening affection that neither could ignore. One evening, while preparing a meal together, Ethan realized that he no longer felt like a visitor in her world. He was becoming part of it, learning not just the skills but the values and mindset that defined her life. He felt a sense of belonging he had never experienced in the cities, a peace that came from knowing he was contributing, learning, and connecting meaningfully. Kaya's presence had opened his eyes to a life of purpose, awareness, and connection. As night fell and the stars filled the sky, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had come to the desert seeking something undefined, and he had found lessons, growth, and a bond that resonated deeply within him. Kaya had not only shared her world, but had guided him to discover a part of himself he had never known. Their connection was no longer just admiration or curiosity. It had become a deep, abiding respect and a quiet love that grew stronger with each shared experience. The desert night wrapped around them like a protective blanket. The fire crackled gently, casting flickering light over their faces, and Ethan felt a clarity he had never known. He understood that the bond he shared with Kaya was not fleeting. It was real, enduring, and transformative. And as he looked at her, sitting quietly beside him, he knew that his life would never be the same again. The pull he felt was no longer just fascination or curiosity. It was a call to fully embrace this world, to learn, to grow, and to be a part of something far greater than himself. As weeks passed, Ethan began to feel fully immersed in Kaya's world. The desert, once intimidating and unfamiliar, had become a place of clarity and understanding. Each day brought lessons, each night brought reflection, and the bond between them deepened steadily. But with understanding came awareness, awareness of the responsibilities, challenges, and harsh realities that defined her life. He had admired Kaya from afar, but now he truly saw what it meant to live as she did, and the reality was not always easy. One morning, Kaya led Ethan to a dry riverbed several miles from their usual path. The sun was rising, painting the rocks in shades of gold and orange. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the horizon, her senses alert. Ethan followed, trying to match her awareness, but he felt the weight of the responsibility he had never faced before. This was not a guided tour. Every step carried potential consequences, and every decision mattered. They had been walking quietly when Kaya suddenly signaled him to stop. "Listen," she whispered. Ethan paused, straining his ears. At first he heard nothing, but then a faint sound reached him, a distant snapping of twigs almost imperceptible. Kaya's eyes narrowed. She crouched low, motioning for him to do the same. "There are others nearby," she said. "We need to move carefully." Ethan's heart raced. He had not expected danger so close to their quiet desert. He followed her lead, learning to move in silence, to notice the subtle signs in the environment and to trust his instincts. They skirted around the area, keeping hidden behind rocks and low shrubs. When the moment passed, Kaya let out a small sigh, her tension easing. "This is the reality of our life," she explained. "We must always be aware, always prepared. The desert is beautiful, but it is also unforgiving." Ethan nodded, feeling a mixture of awe and apprehension. Until now, he had been captivated by the beauty of the desert and the wonder of Kaya's skills, but this moment reminded him that her life was filled with constant challenges. He realized that being part of her world required courage, adaptability, and unwavering attention. It was not a romanticized adventure, it was a demanding, real-life commitment. As they returned to camp, Ethan reflected on his growing feelings for Kaya. He admired her strength, her wisdom, and her grace. He wanted to be part of her world, yet he also felt the weight of what that meant. He was no longer an observer. He had become a participant in a life that demanded more than he had ever given before. And with that participation came responsibility, and with responsibility came fear of failure. In the following days, Ethan faced several situations that tested his resolve. A sudden desert storm forced them to seek shelter in a narrow canyon. Rain fell in sheets and the wind howled, turning the normally serene landscape into a chaotic, slippery maze. Kaya moved with confidence, guiding him to safety, showing him how to secure their small camp and protect their supplies. Ethan struggled but learned quickly, realizing that adaptability and calmness were essential. The storm passed, but the lesson remained. Life in this environment required resilience, quick thinking, and the ability to stay composed under pressure. Another challenge came when they discovered signs of a wildfire in the distance. Smoke curled along the horizon, and the heat was intense. Kaya instructed Ethan on how to create fire breaks, how to move safely, and how to ensure their community remained protected. It was exhausting work both physically and mentally, and Ethan felt his limits tested. Yet, with Kaya's guidance and encouragement, he persisted. By the time the danger had passed, he understood something crucial. Being part of this life meant facing challenges head-on, embracing responsibility, and committing fully to the well-being of others. These experiences forced Ethan to reflect on the life he had left behind. The city, the comfort, and the routine seemed distant and trivial now. He realized that, while he had once sought excitement and adventure, he had found something far more profound with Kaya: purpose, belonging, and a connection to life that was real and tangible. But even with these realizations came a difficult truth. Leaving the desert, returning to his old life, would be both tempting and impossible. One evening, as the sun set over the vast desert horizon, Ethan voiced his thoughts to Kaya. "I feel like I'm learning, growing, changing. But I also feel torn. Part of me knows I can't go back to the way things were, and part of me is afraid I won't be ready for what comes next." Kaya listened carefully, her eyes reflecting understanding. She placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Change is never easy," she said softly, "but growth requires courage. You must decide what you are willing to commit to and whether you are ready to embrace it fully." Ethan knew she was right. The comfort of his old life, with familiar routines and expectations, was tempting. But the desert had taught him lessons he could not unlearn: the value of patience, resilience, and respect. Kaya had shown him a world where every action mattered, where living with purpose was not optional but necessary. He realized that leaving would mean abandoning not only her, but also a version of himself that was emerging slowly, confidently, and with depth he had never known. The days that followed were filled with quiet tension and reflection. Ethan participated in more demanding tasks, helping with water collection, monitoring wildlife, and learning survival strategies. Kaya observed him closely, noting his determination and his occasional doubts. "You are growing stronger," she said one afternoon. "Not just physically, but in your understanding, your awareness, and your commitment. But strength without decision is incomplete. You must choose your path. Ethan knew that the decision would not come easily. It was more than choosing to stay or leave. It was about embracing a way of life, accepting responsibility, and fully committing to Kaya's world. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. He realized that every choice carried weight, and every hesitation could have consequences. The desert, in its vastness and silence, mirrored his inner struggle, beautiful, challenging, and unforgiving. One night, a minor injury tested his resolve further. While assisting Kaya in gathering supplies, he slipped on a rocky slope, scraping his leg and twisting his ankle. The pain was sharp, and he feared he had failed. Kaya tended to him, carefully cleaning the wound and wrapping it. "This is part of life here," she said gently. "You will face challenges and sometimes you will stumble, but resilience is not about never falling. It is about rising, learning, and continuing forward." Ethan felt a mixture of gratitude and humility. He understood that her guidance was not just about skills, but about character, courage, and endurance. By the end of the fourth week, Ethan's understanding of Kaya's world had deepened profoundly. He had faced danger, learned survival skills, and experienced the beauty and harshness of the desert. More importantly, he had faced his own fears, doubts, and limitations. The challenges had forced him to confront the reality of living in this environment and to understand the commitment required to truly belong. The final night of this part of his journey arrived quietly. The desert was calm, the stars brilliant above, and the fire crackled gently beside them. Ethan reflected on everything he had learned, experienced, and felt. He knew the choice before him was not simple, and that it would define the course of his life. Kaya sat beside him, her presence steady, calm, and reassuring. She had shown him the world in its beauty and harshness, and she had offered him a place within it, but only if he was ready to embrace it fully. "I think I understand now," Ethan said quietly. "I can't go back to the life I had before. I want to stay to be part of this world, to learn more and to be with you. But I know it won't be easy." Kaya's eyes softened, and a small smile appeared. "Then you are ready," she said simply. "Ready to face the life you choose with all its challenges and rewards. That is courage. That is commitment." Ethan felt a wave of relief, gratitude, and determination. The desert had tested him, and he had learned to listen, to observe, and to act with awareness and care. Kaya had guided him through moments of fear, challenge, and doubt, helping him grow in ways he could not have imagined. And now, standing on the threshold of a choice, he understood that his path was clear. The journey had not ended, it was only beginning. The desert stretched endlessly under the rising sun, painting the rocks and sand in soft shades of gold and amber. Ethan stood quietly, watching the light touch the landscape, feeling a sense of clarity he had never known before. The days and weeks he had spent with Kaya had changed him profoundly. He was no longer the hesitant traveler who had first wandered into the desert, unsure of what he was seeking. He had learned, adapted, and grown. He had experienced moments of fear, wonder, and reflection, and now he knew what he wanted, what he needed. Ethan turned to Kaya, who was arranging their small camp with her usual calm precision. She moved with confidence, each action purposeful yet fluid, like a dance honed over years of experience. Her eyes caught his, and she smiled softly. That smile, small but filled with warmth and strength, had become a source of comfort for him over the weeks. It was a reminder of everything he had learned, everything he had experienced, and the connection they had formed. "I've made my decision," Ethan said, his voice steady, yet full of emotion. Kaya paused and looked at him, waiting silently. "I want to stay. I want to be part of this world, to continue learning and to be with you." Her eyes softened, reflecting both relief and understanding. "Then you have chosen wisely," she said. "But remember, choosing is only the beginning. Living this life, fully and honestly, is the true test." Ethan nodded, feeling a mix of anticipation and resolve. He understood that staying meant embracing not only Kaya but her culture, her responsibilities, and the demands of life in the desert. There would be challenges, hardships, and moments of doubt, but he felt ready. Over the following days, Ethan began to immerse himself fully in the routines and responsibilities of Kaya's world. He assisted in gathering water, tending to small tasks that sustained the camp, and learning advanced survival skills. Every action, no matter how small, carried significance. He learned to read the wind, track the subtle movements of animals, and anticipate changes in the environment. Kaya guided him patiently, offering encouragement and correction when necessary, but also allowing him the space to discover his own strengths. One afternoon, they ventured deep into a canyon to hunt for small game. Ethan moved cautiously, applying everything he had learned. He felt a sense of focus and awareness he had never experienced before. When they found a deer grazing quietly, he froze, remembering Kaya's lessons about patience and observation. Kaya gave a subtle nod, signaling him to approach carefully. Ethan followed her lead, moving silently, and when the moment came, he assisted in securing the catch respectfully. The experience was exhilarating, yet humbling. He realized that survival was not about domination but about harmony, respect, and skill. In the evenings, as the desert cooled and stars filled the sky, Ethan and Kaya would sit by the fire, reflecting on the day's events. They shared stories, laughed quietly at small mishaps, and spoke of hopes and dreams. The connection between them deepened naturally, built on shared experiences, trust, and understanding. Ethan began to feel a sense of belonging that went far beyond admiration. He felt part of a community, a way of life, and a partnership that was authentic and enduring. One night, as they watched the moon rise over the desert, Ethan spoke softly. "I never imagined life could be like this. I thought I was searching for something exciting, but I've found something far more meaningful. I feel whole here with you." Kaya reached out, placing her hand over his. "You have found yourself, Ethan. That is the greatest reward. And our connection, it is real, but it is also responsibility. You must continue to grow, to respect, and to contribute. Only then will this life be complete." Ethan understood the depth of her words. Being with Kaya was not simply about companionship or attraction. It was about commitment, understanding, and shared purpose. Every choice he made affected not only himself but the community, the environment, and the harmony they had built together. It was a life that required courage, dedication, and empathy, qualities he now felt growing within himself. The next challenge came when a sudden summer storm swept across the desert. The wind howled, and the sky darkened with heavy clouds. Kaya immediately took action, securing their camp and guiding Ethan to safety. The storm tested his skills and composure. He felt the sharp sting of rain and the rush of wind, yet he also felt the calm determination that Kaya had instilled in him. Together, they navigated the dangers, supporting each other and learning to trust both their instincts and their bond. By the time the storm passed, Ethan realized that his confidence and resilience had grown immeasurably. In the following weeks, Ethan continued to integrate fully into Kaya's world. He learned to prepare food, make essential tools, and anticipate the needs of the environment. Each task, no matter how ordinary, carried lessons of patience, respect, and mindfulness. He began to notice the beauty in small details, the patterns in the sand, the movement of birds, the subtle changes in the weather. The desert was no longer just a backdrop. It was alive, teaching, challenging, and rewarding him in ways he could never have imagined. Through it all, Kaya remained a guiding presence. She encouraged him to explore, to observe, and to reflect. But she also allowed him the space to make mistakes, to learn from them, and to grow. Ethan felt a deep sense of gratitude for her patience, wisdom, and support. He knew that without her guidance, he could not have become the person he was now, a person who understood the value of resilience, respect, and connection. One morning, as they watched the sunrise over the horizon, Kaya turned to him. "Ethan, you have chosen this life. You have faced challenges, learned, and grown. Now you are truly part of this world." Ethan felt a surge of emotion. The journey had been difficult, filled with uncertainty, fear, and hard lessons. But he had persevered, guided by respect, determination, and the bond he shared with Kaya. In that moment, he realized that he had not only found a home but a purpose, a life intertwined with courage, growth, and love. The final days of Ethan's integration into the desert world were filled with moments of reflection and celebration. He participated in community activities, contributed to daily tasks, and continued to learn from Kaya and others. The connection he felt with her was now seamless, built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. He understood that this life required constant attention, effort, and heart, and he was ready to embrace it fully. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Ethan looked around at the desert, the stars, and Kaya. "I never want to leave this place," he said quietly. "I've found everything I was searching for, lessons, purpose, and you." Kaya smiled, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Then stay, Ethan. Live fully, learn always, and honor this life. That is all anyone can ask." As the desert night embraced them, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. He had made his choice, faced his fears, and embraced a life that challenged, inspired, and fulfilled him. Kaya's world had become his own, a place of beauty, strength, and connection. And as he looked at her, standing confidently beside him, he knew that he had found something extraordinary, a life of purpose, a bond of trust and respect, and a love that was both profound and enduring. The days and nights that followed were filled with simple joys and meaningful work. Ethan continued to learn, adapt, and grow, always guided by Kaya's wisdom and presence. They shared moments of quiet reflection, laughter, and companionship, building a life grounded in respect, courage, and understanding. Each day was a testament to their journey, their bond, and the choices that had brought them together. And so, as the sun set over the vast desert, casting long shadows and painting the landscape in warm, golden hues, Ethan knew without doubt that he had made the right decision. He would never go back to the life he had left behind. This was his home now, with Kaya in a world that demanded courage, rewarded resilience, and offered a connection deeper than anything he had ever known. In choosing to stay, he had found not just love, but a life filled with meaning, purpose, and endless possibility.